My sister smirked.
Grandpa would have wanted the whole family to enjoy the cabin after turning the place into a hangout spot for her friends. So I said, if that were true, he wouldn't have put only my name on the deed. I'm starting to feel like I'm going crazy. My grandfather passed away 8 months ago and left me his lakeside cabin in his will. It wasn't a surprise. We were incredibly close, and he'd always told me the cabin would be mine someday. He taught me how to fish there, how to maintain the property, and we spent countless weekends working on projects together. The cabin meant everything to both of us. The property isn't just sentimentally valuable. It's worth about $400,000 and sits on prime lakefront real estate. My grandfather was very specific in his will that the cabin should go to someone who would cherish and maintain it as a family legacy. He chose me because I was the only grandchild who showed genuine interest in the property and helped with upkeep over the years. My sister Jessica, 27F, never cared about the cabin growing up. She thought it was boring and old-fashioned, preferring hotel vacations and spa weekends. She complained about the mosquitoes, the lack of Wi-Fi, and called it rustic in the most dismissive way possible. When Grandpa was alive, she visited maybe twice in the last decade. Here's where things get complicated. Last weekend, I drove up to the cabin for the first time since inheriting it, planning to spend some quiet time there and start going through Grandpa's remaining belongings. I had my key ready, but when I walked up to the door, I could hear loud music and voices inside. I knocked, and some guy I'd never seen before answered, wearing swim trunks and holding a beer. Behind him, I could see at least 6 people lounging around my living room, and the place was rigged with high grass. The guy looked annoyed and asked what I wanted. When I explained that this was my cabin, he laughed and said Jessica had told them they could stay the weekend and that her family owned the place. I was livid. I called Jessica immediately, and she acted like I was being unreasonable. She said our parents had given her a key months ago and told her she could use the cabin whenever she wanted for her weekend getaways. Apparently, she'd been bringing friends up there regularly and had even started advertising it on her social media as our family's vacation cabin. When I told her I inherited the cabin and she had no right to be there, she got defensive and said Grandpa would have wanted the whole family to enjoy it. She insisted that just because the paperwork had my name on it didn't mean I should hoard it from everyone else. She actually called me selfish for wanting to kick her friends out. The worst part? My parents are backing her up. When I called them, my mom said I was being petty and territorial and that family should share. My dad suggested I compromise by letting Jessica have it on weekends since I work during the week anyway. They keep saying that Grandpa would have wanted the cabin to bring the family together, not divide us. But here's what they are not understanding or choosing to ignore. Grandpa specifically left the cabin to me because he trusted me to care for it properly. I found out from Jessica's friends that they'd been using his fishing equipment without cleaning it, leaving dishes in the sink for days, and someone had even carved their initials into his handmade dining table. There were beer bottles scattered around the deck, and they'd apparently been having bonfires dangerously close to the treen. I ended up having to ask Jessica's friends to leave, which created a huge scene. They were hostile and kept insisting they had permission to be there. One guy actually argued with me about it, saying I couldn't just show up and kick them out of Jessica's cabin. It was humiliating and infuriating. Now my entire family is mad at me. Jessica is telling everyone I'm on a power trip and trying to exclude the family from Grandpa's memory. My parents are pressuring me to do the right thing and share the cabin, since it's what Grandpa would have wanted. They're making me feel like I'm being greedy and selfish for wanting to honor the actual terms of his will. But I know Grandpa. He left detailed instructions about maintaining the property, and he specifically chose me because he knew I'd respect and preserve it. He watched Jessica's careless attitude toward the cabin for years. There's a reason he didn't leave it to the family. He left it to me specifically. I'm torn between wanting to maintain family peace and protecting something that meant the world to my grandfather. The cabin isn't just a vacation spot. It's a legacy that requires responsible stewardship. Am I wrong for wanting to establish boundaries? Should I just let Jessica continue using it to keep the peace, even though she's clearly not treating it with the respect it deserves? Any advice would be appreciated. I feel like I'm losing my mind here. Edit. Thank you for all the responses. I'm reading through everything, and it's helping me realize I'm not crazy for wanting to protect what Grandpa left me. Some people are asking about the key situation. Apparently, my mom still had a spare key from when she used to help Grandpa with cleaning, and she gave it to Jessica without asking me. I'm definitely changing the locks this week. Update 1. My sister has been advertising my inherited cabin as her vacation rental. It's been 3 weeks since my original post, and things have gotten so much worse. Thank you to everyone who commented and helped me realize I wasn't being unreasonable. Your support gave me the courage to dig deeper into what's been happening with my cabin. First, I changed the locks immediately after that weekend. I hired a locksmith and had the entire property rekeyed, including the boathouse and storage shed. I also installed a simple security system with cameras around the perimeter. I didn't tell my family I was doing this. I just did it. The real bombshell came when I started investigating how long Jessica had been using the cabin. Remember how that guy said Jessica told them her family owned the place? Well, I decided to check her social media more thoroughly, and what I found made my blood boil. Jessica has been posting about weekend getaways at our family cabin for the past 4 months. Basically, since right after the funeral, she's been tagging the location, posting photos of herself and friends on the deck, and even created a highlight reel called Lake House Life. In several posts, she refers to it as my family's retreat and talks about growing up there, which is complete since she barely visited. But here's the kicker. I found evidence that she's been essentially renting it out to friends. In one group chat screenshot that someone sent me, Jessica was telling people they could use her cabin for $200 per weekend if they cleaned up after themselves. She's been making money off my grandfather's property while I've been paying the property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs. I also discovered that she's been hosting parties there regularly. Neighbors had actually been calling my grandfather's old landline, which I still have connected, to complain about noise and cars blocking the narrow lake road. I had 17 voicemails from angry neighbors describing loud music, people trespassing on adjacent properties, and someone's car getting stuck in the marsh because they parked in the wrong spot. The property damage is worse than I initially thought. Besides the carved table, I found cigarette burns on the deck railing, a broken window in the boathouse that had been poorly covered with duct tape, and someone had used my grandfather's vintage fishing tackle box as a cooler, ruining the wood and leaving rust stains. The worst part was finding spray paint on the dock where someone had tagged it with some stupid inside joke. When I confronted Jessica about the rental situation, she completely lost it. She screamed at me over the phone, saying I was obsessing over a bunch of old stuff, and that Grandpa would be ashamed of how materialistic I was being. She actually said that the cabin was rotting away because I wasn't using it enough, and that she was bringing life back to the place. I told her she needed to stop posting about the cabin online and stop bringing people there. Her response was to block me on all social media and tell our parents that I was harassing her and being controlling. My parents' reaction has been incredibly disappointing. When I showed them the evidence of Jessica charging people to stay there, my mom said I was spying on my sister and that families should trust each other. My dad actually suggested that Jessica sharing the costs with friends was responsible and showed she was trying to help with expenses. They completely ignored the property damage and neighbor complaints. The final straw came last weekend. Despite the changed locks, I arrived at the cabin to find Jessica and 2 friends sitting on the deck. They had climbed through a window that Jessica remembered didn't lock properly from her childhood visits. She was sitting in my grandfather's favorite chair, like she owned the place. And when she saw me, she said, "We need to talk about this situation." Jessica demanded that I give her a new key and stop playing games. She said that cutting her off from the cabin was punishing the whole family, and that I was dishonoring Grandpa's memory by being so exclusive. Her friends just sat there awkwardly while she yelled at me about how I was destroying family relationships over a house. I told her she was trespassing and needed to leave immediately. She refused, saying she had just as much right to be there as I did, because it's a family property. I ended up having to call the non-emergency police line to have them escort her off the property. The officer was professional and explained that regardless of family dynamics, I was the legal owner and could determine who was allowed on the property. The humiliation of having police remove my own sister from my grandfather's cabin was heartbreaking. But what really got to me was that she showed no remorse about the damage or disrespect she'd been showing to his memory. Even as she was leaving, she was texting furiously on her phone, probably rallying more family members against me. My extended family has now gotten involved. My aunt called me yesterday to say that I was tearing the family apart and that Grandpa would be rolling in his grave if he knew I was keeping Jessica away from the cabin. Several cousins have sent me passive-aggressive texts about how family is forever, and suggesting I should reconsider my priorities. The thing is, I've been going through more of Grandpa's papers, and I found a letter he wrote to his lawyer about the cabin. In it, he specifically mentions his concerns about leaving property to multiple people because he'd seen other families destroy each other, fighting over inheritance. He wrote that he wanted the cabin to go to someone who would preserve its integrity and peaceful nature, rather than turn it into a party destination. Reading that letter made me realize that Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing when he left the cabin to me. He could see Jessica's attitude toward the property, and he made a deliberate choice to entrust it to someone who would respect it. I've decided to install better security, and I'm considering getting a property management company to check on things when I'm not there. I'm also documenting everything in case Jessica tries to escalate this legally, though my lawyer says she doesn't have any claim to the property. The hardest part is feeling like I'm losing my family over this, but I keep thinking about my grandfather and how he trusted me to protect something he loved. I can't let him down, even if it means standing alone. Edit. Some people are asking about the neighbor complaints. I've reached out to apologize and explained the situation. Most have been understanding, and one couple even shared stories about my grandfather helping them with dock repairs over the years. It's clear he was respected in the community, which makes Jessica's behavior even more embarrassing. Update 2. 3 months later, family still furious. I won't share my cabin. It's been 3 months since I changed the locks and installed security, and I thought things would have calmed down by now. I was wrong. If anything, my family has doubled down on their campaign to make me the villain in this situation. The security cameras I installed have been worth every penny. In the past month alone, I've caught Jessica trying to access the property 4 different times. The first time, she brought a ladder and tried to get in through an upstairs window. The second time, she had someone I didn't recognize with her, who was clearly casing the property for easier entry points. The third time, she actually brought a crowbar and tried to pry open the door before giving up and leaving. The fourth incident was the most brazen. Jessica showed up with our parents and what looked like a locksmith. I watched the whole thing unfold on my security app from work. The locksmith was actually questioning whether they had the right to change the locks, but my father kept insisting they owned the property. When the locksmith asked for documentation, my mother started crying and talking about how their cruel son had locked them out of their family memories. I immediately called the locksmith company and explained that I was the legal owner and they were attempting to break into my property. I told them to leave immediately. The locksmith left quickly after that, but not before my father berated him about not understanding family situations. Watching my own parents try to break into my property was surreal and heartbreaking. The family pressure has been relentless. Every major family event, birthdays, holidays, casual dinners, has become an intervention about the cabin. Last month, at my cousin's wedding, multiple relatives approached me to discuss my selfishness. My aunt cornered me during the reception and spent 20 minutes explaining how I was destroying the family legacy and how disappointed my grandfather would be. The most hurtful conversation was with my grandmother, Grandpa's widow. Jessica had apparently told her that I was keeping the family away from precious memories of her late husband. My grandmother, who's 84 and not always clear on details, called me crying and begging me to let the family heal together at the cabin. She kept saying that keeping people away from the lake was not what Harold would have wanted. That conversation nearly broke me, because I could hear how much pain Jessica had caused by manipulating our grandmother's grief. I tried to explain the real situation, the property damage, the unauthorized rentals, the parties, but my grandmother just kept repeating that family should stick together and that I needed to be the bigger person. Jessica has escalated her social media campaign too. She's now posting throwback photos of family gatherings at the cabin from years ago, with captions like, "Miss the days when family mattered more than paperwork." And some people forget where they came from. She's created this narrative where I'm the greedy relative who stole the family gathering place and turned it into my personal fortress. Her friends have joined in the online harassment. They've been leaving comments on my professional social media accounts about how I'm selfish and heartless. One person even left a negative review on my company's Google page, claiming I was unprofessional and greedy in personal matters. I had to contact my HR department to explain the situation in case it escalated further. The breaking point came 6 weeks ago, when I arrived at the cabin for a weekend and found evidence of another break-in. Someone had gotten inside, I'm not sure how, and had clearly spent time there. There were dirty dishes in the sink, towels on the bathroom floor, and someone had gone through my grandfather's closet and bureau drawers. Nothing was stolen, but seeing someone rifle through his personal belongings felt like a violation of his memory. Most disturbing was what I found in the guest bedroom. Someone had been sleeping there and had left behind a note that said, "This place has too much love to be locked away. Jay would want everyone to feel welcome here." It was clearly referring to my grandfather, and the handwriting looked like Jessica's, though she denied it when I confronted her. I upgraded the security system again and installed reinforced doors and window locks. I also started staying at the cabin more frequently, partly to protect it, and partly because it's the only place I feel connected to my grandfather anymore. The family's behavior has made me realize how much I need that connection to him, especially now. My parents have tried different tactics to get me to share the cabin. My mother suggested that I could have the cabin during the week and Jessica could have weekends. When I refused, she proposed a schedule where different family members could reserve time slots. My father even offered to pay for improvements to the cabin if I would give Jessica a key. The most manipulative attempt came when my mother called crying and said that Jessica was falling into depression because she felt rejected by the family. According to my mom, Jessica had been planning to propose to her boyfriend at the cabin because it was where their love story began. Another lie. Since Jessica barely brought any boyfriends to the cabin when Grandpa was alive, I've started seeing a therapist to deal with the family pressure and grief. It's been helpful to have someone neutral confirm that I'm not being unreasonable. My therapist pointed out that my family is essentially demanding that I ignore my grandfather's explicit wishes and let Jessica continue behavior that disrespects his memory. What's kept me strong is going through more of my grandfather's belongings and finding evidence of how much the cabin meant to him. I found journals where he wrote about specific improvements he'd made, wildlife he'd observed, and peaceful mornings he'd spent on the deck. In one entry, he wrote about how much he hoped the next generation would understand what makes this place special. I also found letters between him and his lawyer discussing the inheritance. In one letter, the lawyer asked if he wanted to leave the cabin to multiple family members, and my grandfather's response was clear. The cabin needs one caretaker who understands its value. Too many cooks spoil the broth, and too many owners ruin a property. Reading those words confirm that I'm honoring his wishes, even when it feels like the whole family is against me. The cabin isn't just real estate. It's a responsibility that he specifically entrusted to me. Jessica made one last major play 2 weeks ago. She showed up at my apartment with our parents and said they'd been discussing a family solution. She proposed that we put the cabin into a family trust, where everyone would have equal access and decision-making power. When I refused, she broke down crying and accused me of caring more about a house than my own family. My father said this was my last chance to do the right thing before they considered legal action. I told them that the cabin was legally mine, and if they pursued any legal challenges, I would countersue for trespassing, property damage, and harassment. They left angry, and we haven't spoken since. The silence from my family has been both peaceful and lonely. Part of me misses the relationships I had with them, but I can't ignore how they've behaved. They've shown no respect for my grandfather's wishes, no acknowledgement of Jessica's misconduct, and no understanding of why the cabin means so much to me. I'm planning to spend most of the summer at the cabin, working remotely when possible, and really taking time to connect with a place that meant so much to my grandfather. I want to understand what he loved about it and make sure I'm caring for it the way he would have wanted. Edit. Thank you for all the support. Several people have suggested I change my will to ensure the cabin goes to someone who will respect it if something happens to me. That's definitely something I'm considering. Update 3. 6 months later, I found peace. My family is still angry. It's been 6 months since I last updated, and I wanted to share how things have evolved. The short version is that I found peace with my decision, while my family remains convinced I'm the villain. But I've learned to be okay with that. The security upgrades worked. Jessica hasn't attempted any more break-ins since I installed the reinforced locks and improved cameras. I think the reality of potential legal consequences finally sank in after I sent a formal cease and desist letter through my lawyer. The letter clearly outlined the trespassing incidents, property damage, and unauthorized use, and warned that any future violations would result in criminal charges. My relationship with my parents and Jessica remains non-existent. We haven't spoken in 4 months, not since my mother made one final attempt to guilt me into sharing the cabin. She called crying and said that Jessica was so heartbroken about losing access to family memories that she was considering moving to another state. The manipulation was so transparent that I actually felt relieved rather than guilty. The extended family pressure has mostly died down, though I'm no longer invited to large family gatherings. My cousin's wife told me privately that Jessica has been telling everyone I've become obsessed with money and property, and that grief has made me paranoid and controlling. Rather than fighting these narratives, I've chosen to step away from family events entirely. The most painful loss was my relationship with my grandmother. Jessica convinced her that I was keeping the family away from precious memories of my grandfather, and my grandmother passed away 3 months ago, still believing I was being selfish. I wasn't invited to the funeral planning, though I did attend the service. Jessica made a point of talking about how much my grandmother had missed family gatherings at the lake house in her eulogy, which felt like a final manipulation, even at our grandmother's funeral. But here's what's changed. I've stopped letting their opinions define my experience of the cabin, or my grandfather's memory. I've spent significant time at the cabin this year, and it's become a source of healing rather than stress. I've been going through my grandfather's journals more systematically, and I've learned so much about his connection to the property. He documented seasonal changes, wildlife patterns, and maintenance projects in incredible detail. Reading his entries has helped me understand not just what he loved about the place, but how to care for it properly. I found one journal entry from 5 years ago that particularly moved me. He wrote, "Spent the morning fixing the dock planks that winter damaged. Every repair feels like a conversation with this old place. Jessica visited last weekend and seemed bored by the quiet. She kept asking when we would get Wi-Fi installed and complained about the mosquitoes. I understand not everyone finds peace in the same places, but I worry about what happens to places like this when people stop appreciating simple beauty." That entry confirmed something I'd always sensed. My grandfather knew Jessica didn't value the cabin the way he did, and he made his inheritance decision accordingly. I've also discovered that my grandfather had been documenting family visits over the years. In one notebook, he tracked how often each family member visited and what activities they engaged in. The data was stark. Over the past decade, I had spent more than 200 nights at the cabin, helping with projects and just enjoying the peace, while Jessica had visited maybe 15 times, usually for large family gatherings, where she spent most of her time indoors on her phone. This documentation helped me realize that my grandfather's decision wasn't arbitrary or unfair. It was based on years of observing who actually cared about the property and its preservation. I've started honoring my grandfather's memory in ways that feel meaningful. I've restored the dock using his detailed notes about proper wood treatment and structural support. I've replanted the native flower garden that he maintained for decades, but that had been damaged during Jessica's parties. I even found his unfinished project list and have been working through the items he prioritized. The most significant project was restoring his workshop in the boathouse. Jessica's friends had used it as a storage area for party supplies, but I found his original tool organization system, documented in a sketch he'd made years ago. Spending hours organizing his tools and reading his notes about various projects has felt like continuing conversations we started when I was young. I've also connected with the lake community in ways my grandfather would have appreciated. The neighbors who complained about Jessica's parties have become friendly acquaintances who share stories about my grandfather's helpfulness over the years. One couple told me he helped them install their dock for free, and another family mentioned that he always shared vegetables from his garden. Learning about his reputation in the community reinforced that I'm not just caring for a piece of property, I'm maintaining relationships and traditions that meant something to him. The financial aspect has worked out well, too. The cabin's value has continued to appreciate, and I've been able to afford proper maintenance and improvements from my regular salary. I've kept detailed records of all expenses and upgrades, partly for my own planning and partly because I want to document how the property has been cared for. I've also established clear policies for any future family interactions regarding the cabin. Through my lawyer, I've drafted a formal statement that the property will remain solely under my ownership and control, and that any future inheritance decisions will be made independently based on demonstrated respect for the property and my grandfather's values. Most importantly, I've stopped feeling guilty about enforcing boundaries. My therapist helped me understand that my family's reaction says more about their sense of entitlement than about my character. My grandfather chose me specifically because he trusted my judgment, and honoring that trust requires making decisions that protect what he valued. I've started documenting my own stewardship of the cabin, partly inspired by my grandfather's detailed journals. I'm recording improvements, seasonal observations, and memories created there. Whether future generations will appreciate this documentation remains to be seen, but it feels like continuing my grandfather's tradition of treating the cabin as more than just a recreational property. The peace I found at the cabin has been profound. Without the stress of family conflict and unauthorized visitors, I've been able to experience the tranquility my grandfather wrote about in his journals. I understand now why he loved early mornings on the deck, why he spent hours watching the lake, and why he found such satisfaction in maintaining the property himself. One morning last month, while sitting in his favorite chair, watching the sunrise over the lake, I realized that I'd achieved what my grandfather had hoped for when he left me the cabin. I wasn't just preserving a piece of real estate. I was continuing a legacy of appreciation for natural beauty, careful stewardship, and finding peace in simple pleasures. My family may never understand or forgive my decisions, but I've learned to be okay with that. Some relationships don't survive boundary setting, and that's a cost I'm willing to pay to honor my grandfather's trust and maintain my own integrity. The cabin has become my sanctuary, just as it was my grandfather's. That's exactly what he intended, and I'm grateful every day that he trusted me with something so precious to him. Final edit. Thank you to everyone who has followed this journey and offered support. Your encouragement helped me stay strong when family pressure felt overwhelming. I hope my grandfather would be proud of how I've cared for his beloved cabin and the values he taught me about responsibility, integrity, and finding peace in nature's beauty. For anyone dealing with similar family conflicts over inheritance, I'd encourage you to remember that honoring the wishes of the person who left you something is more important than managing other people's expectations or disappointment. Sometimes protecting what matters requires standing alone, and that's okay. The cabin will always be my grandfather's legacy, and I'm honored to be its caretaker.